Welcome to Talking History, a series of talks from the Farnham U3A World History Group. The views expressed in this talk are representative of the views held at the time of the material being discussed. They do not necessarily represent the views of the speaker, the Farnham U3A World History Group, nor the team at the Mr. T podcast studio. In this talk, the last in our series of short talks on entertainment and entertainers, Tim Davies tells us about the early days of the cinema in his talk, Going to the Pictures. I'm going to start a little bit before the cinema. And I'm going first of all to talk about magic lanterns, which project pictures, paintings, prints and photographs using transparent plates made of glass. Believe it or not, they were originally developed in the 17th century and were often used for entertainment by travelling showmen, conjurers and storytellers. Johannes Zahn advocated their use for educational purposes because detailed anatomical illustrations are difficult to draw, but once copied onto glass slides could be used many times. In the 1820s, Philip Carpenter developed a copper plate printing and burning process which enabled them to be mass-produced. The Elements of Zoology appeared in 1823 with over 200 zoological images. Other slides in the catalogue included the kings and queens of England, astronomical diagrams and constellations, views and buildings, and ancient and modern costume. There were also 15 sets in the category humorous. In the 17th century, the only artificial light was from candles and oil lamps, giving a very dim projected image. But in the 1790s, the argand oil lamp made the images brighter. The much brighter limelight, developed in the 1820s, used a block of calcium oxide heated to incandescence in jets of hydrogen burning in oxygen. In the 1860s, the electric arc lamp removed the need for such combustible gases and hazardous chemicals. The magic lantern was not only a direct ancestor of the slide projector for visual storytelling. Yes, you could go out for dinner in the 1850s and have an evening watching slides that they had brought, just like you did in the 1960s with the slides of their holiday. It could be used to project moving images with the movement achieved by alternating between pictures of different phases of emotion, or by using two glass slides projected together, one with the stationary part of the picture and the other with the motion part, such as a train passing through a landscape. Subjects with repetitive movements were popular, like the sails on a windmill turning or children on a seesaw. There are also slides that could produce, for example, a kaleidoscope effect. Opening in 1838, the Royal Polytechnic Institution in London was a popular venue with many kinds of magic lantern. The 500-seat theatre could use a battery of 6 large lanterns running on track tables to project the finely detailed images of extra-large slides on a 648-square-foot screen. Lanterns could also be bought for home use, a forerunner maybe of the television, and were widely used until superseded by the slide projector. Moving on. The mutoscope was an early motion picture device invented by W.K.L. Dixon and Herman Kassler. Their US patent was granted on the 5th of November, 1895. Only one person at a time could view the show through a single lens enclosed by a hood. It quickly dominated the coin-in-the-slot peep show business. The mutoscope is like a flip book. The individual frames are conventional black and white prints attached to a circular core, like a huge Rolodex. A reel typically holds about 850 cards, giving a viewing time of about a minute. In the UK, they were popular in amusement arcades and on piers until the introduction of decimal coinage in 1971, as the coin mechanisms were difficult to convert. So many were destroyed, although some were exported to Denmark, where pornography had recently been legalised. Arcades included multiple machines offering a mixture of fare, usually including girly reels, often with suggestive titles that implied far more than the reel actually delivered. What the Butler saw became the name for the machine in Britain. It is said that the first real moving picture in the world was shot in Leeds by Louis Le Prince in 1888, and the first on celluloid film was made in Hyde Park, the Hyde Park in London, in 1889 by William Freeze Green. The first people to build a working 35mm camera in Britain were Robert W. Paul and Bert Akers, who made the first British film, Incident at Clovelly Cottage, in February 1895. They then fell out over the patent for the camera. The first public film shows to a paying audience in the UK were in London on the 21st of February 1896 at the Polytechnic Institute on Upper Regent Street. It was a programme of the Lumiere brothers' new moving picture device, the cinematograph. The short films made in France by the Lumiere brothers were so successful that this became one of the top items on the bill at the Empire Music Hall in Leicester Square. Not to be outdone, British inventor R.W. Paul then showed films at Olympia the following month using his rival system. That then moved into the Alhambra Music Hall in Leicester Square. And in March 1897, the Palace Theatre in Cambridge Circus adopted the American biograph system. The earliest British films were of everyday events. They were narrative shorts, comedies and melodramas. And there was a preference for storylines already known to the audience, such as adaptations of Shakespeare plays and Dickens novels. In 1898, Charles Urban expanded the Warwick Trading Company to produce films in Britain, mainly documentaries and news. And in the same year, the Gaumont British Picture Corporation was founded as a subsidiary of the French Gaumont Film Company. They built Limegrove Studios in 1915, the first building built in Britain solely for film production. Meanwhile, Hepworth Studios was founded in Lambeth. The Bamforths, of saucy postcard fame, began making films in Holmfirth, and William Hagger made films in Wales. Will Barker founded Ealing Studios in 1902, and they're the oldest continuously operating film studio in the world. Frank Mottershaw of Sheffield produced a daring daylight robbery in 1903, launching the chase genre of films. And in 1913, stage director Maurice Elvey moved over to directing films, and by 1957 he'd made almost 200. 1914 saw the foundation of Elstree Studios. By the mid-1920s, the British film industry was losing out to heavy competition from the United States, the United States having a much larger home market. In 1914, 25% of the films shown in Britain were British, but by 1926 this had fallen to 5%. Initially, the new marvel of animated pictures spread rapidly through travelling fairs, showmen hiring local halls for special shows, and the music halls. But around 1906, seeing a lasting appeal, businessmen started to take over shops, halls, railway arches, and even a disused sweet factory, where they painted over the windows and crudely converted them into full-time cinemas. One resembled a railway carriage presenting moving tours of the world, photographed along railway lines. For many people, cinemas and the films they showed were windows onto a new world. Like the American Nickelodeons, some of London's early cinemas were extremely cheap, charging only a penny or twopence to get in. LCC licensing reports and early film trade directories suggest that the total number of cinemas in and around London increased from 133 in 1909 to 349 in 1911, and by the end of 1914 to 522. Weekly attendance soared during the First World War to 18 million at the start of 1916 and 21 million in 1917. Now, some of this rise was from the marketing of the film stars such as Mary Pickford and Charlie Chaplin. There was the success of film serials. There were longer feature films and the popular appeal of newsreels and official war films. Now, whilst many of the pre-war cinemas remained open throughout the 1920s, the number of cinemas in London dropped to around 400. However, the average size increased, and some seated as many as 2,000 or 3,000 people. By 1927, the largest cinema chains had reached around 20 cinemas. But Gaumont British became the largest with 180 by 1928 and 300 by 1929. ABC Cinemas was founded in 1927, and the Odeon chain opened in 1928. By 1937, these three chains controlled almost a quarter of all the cinemas in the country, and a booking by one of these chains was critical for the success of any British film. The early pioneers. Britain was a key early adopter of emerging cinema technology. William Freeze Green, who I mentioned earlier, was a British photographer, chemist, and maverick inventor, and is credited by some as the inventor of cinematography. He began experimenting with celluloid materials for films, and in June 1889 patented an improved apparatus for taking photographs in rapid series. This was his chronophotographic camera, taking up to 10 frames a second using perforated celluloid film. His experimenting and lack of commercial success made him bankrupt in 1891. However, he wasn't put off, and he went on to experiment with colour and named his system Biocolor. A dedicated man to the end, he died on the 5th of May 1921 at a film and cinema meeting in the Connaught Rooms in Kingsway. Another pioneer I mentioned a bit earlier was Cecil Hepworth. The son of a magic lantern showman, he and his cousin Monty Wicks built a studio in the back garden of a house in Walton-on-Thames in 1899. They made some key early films, including Rescued by Rover in 1905, about the kidnap of a baby followed by its rescue. That was a tremendous audience pleaser. Kinemacolor was the first successful colour film process, and in use from 1908 to 1918. Invented by George Albert Smith in 1906 and launched by the Urban Trading Company in 1908, licenses were sold globally. It's a two-colour additive process, photographing a black and white film behind alternating red-orange and blue-green filters. You then project the film through red and green filters. The press opening was in London on the 1st of May 1908, with a second demonstration on the 23rd of July in front of the Lord Mayor of London and 60 other guests. The public first saw Kinemacolor at London's Palace Theatre on the 26th of February 1909, with 21 films mainly shot around Brighton and the French Riviera. On the 6th of July, 11 Kinemacolor films, including military subjects and a party at Knowsley Hall, were shown to King Edward VII. Edward VII then was the main feature, the 1910 urban-produced first colour newsreel, The Funeral of Edward VII, the first notable Kinemacolor production and a financial success. The process enjoyed some commercial success in the UK, where between 1909 and 1918 it was shown at more than 250 entertainment venues. But it was never a real success due to the expense of installing the special Kinemacolor projectors, and because the process, using the filters both for making the film and projecting it, caused fringing and haloing. But over 290 films are listed as being made in Kinemacolor, including films about beauty spots such as A Visit to Aldershot in 1909 and the fascinating sounding Aldershot Views from 1912. And like the magic lantern, moving film equipment was developed for use in the home, particularly using the 9.5mm format in the early years, which was launched by Pathé in 1922. There was both black and white and later colour film available. This podcast has been produced by the Mr. T Podcast Studio in association with the Farnham U3A World History Group. Thank you very much for listening to this talk.